Now, for a more in-depth look at the considerations being made, we are joined in studio by former Israeli intelligence official Avi Melamed. Thank you very much for being with us. The big question on everyone's mind is, at what point does Hezbollah join this conflict? And with Iran threatening to get directly involved, what other capabilities beyond Hezbollah do they bring to the table?
Well, Ariel, thank you for having me. Let's put things in wider context. Iran built around Israel what we call Ring of Fire, which is based on three different arenas: Syria, Lebanon, Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip, under the rule of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, is an enormously significant component in the Iranian master plan. Why? Because the Iranian has an interest to further fuel the flames of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That's the reason why we saw this repeating military rounds between Israel and Gaza Strip. The downfall of Hamas in Gaza Strip is a massive blow to the Iranian master plan. That's the reason why they are trying to deter, at this moment, Israel from expanding the war. But they and Hezbollah, Iran and Hezbollah, since day one of this war, are finding themselves in a dilemma. Here is the dilemma. If Iran is going to send Hezbollah to the war, Iran is going to jeopardize not only the risk or downfall of Hamas in Gaza Strip, which seems to be like almost imminent, but also a massive strike to Hezbollah, which is the most significant proxy of the Iranians. The Iranian dilemma is further boosted given the fact that the United States of America this time sends very clear messages to the Iranian: stay out. This message is backed by an American military operation on the ground, deployment on the ground. Here is something that the mullah regime in Tehran has to take into consideration. Its presence in Syria, which is the most significant component in this structure that the mullah regime has built. Its military presence in Syria that he has built for the last decade. We are talking about militias, we are talking about anti-aircraft, we are talking about missile deposits, and so on and so on. All this infrastructure could be eliminated within hours, because today in the region there is enough aerial force to do that. This is the thing that the mullah regime is now facing, the dilemma. So for the time being, they are trying to deter Israel by conducting double policy, sending threats to all of its proxies, starting in Yemen, going through Iraq, Syria, Hezbollah, and others. And the second thing they are trying to do, they are basically initiating a very calculated, small-scale, low-intensifying escalation in the Israeli northern border. But the dilemma of the Iranians and Hezbollah is there. That dilemma is going to increase as much as the more as expected. The Israeli ground operation in Gaza Strip is going to take place. They don't really have much time to decide.
Now, Hezbollah's firepower is massive. They have 150,000 advanced missiles pointed at Israeli cities as we speak, and Iran wouldn't have spent the money or the time arming them if they did not intend to use them. When that front does go hot, and it certainly seems inevitable, if not immediate, that it will go hot, how will Israel deal a knockout blow against Hezbollah to ensure they no longer pose a threat to Israel's cities?
Well, there are a couple components of this question, Ariel. One is, as you said accurately, Hezbollah presents an enormous threat to the state of Israel. If Hezbollah is going to be massively involved in the war, it's going to cause Israel an enormous damage and destruction. That is correct. On the other hand, we have to remember something about the Hezbollah in Iran. From the Iranian perspective, the most significant strategic objective or task of the Hezbollah is to ensure and maintain the Iranian control in Lebanon, because that presents the Iranians with a presence offshore the Mediterranean. The secondary task that could always wait as far as the Iranian regime is concerned, the secondary task is the whole issue of the elimination of the state of Israel. In the Iranian master plan, they would not, until now, risk Hezbollah in a war with Israel. Their master plan was, and still is to the best of my understanding, to basically be able to operate all the arenas of this ring of fire, namely Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian-backed Shiite militias in Syria, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip. According to the Iranian master plan, the most preferable scenario was that one day, when the time comes, all those components together will be simultaneously activated against the state of Israel. The activation of the Gaza Strip on Saturday by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and particularly the disastrous outcome of that, to a large extent, disrupt the Iranian master plan. I was sitting here a week ago when the whole war started, and I said right there, I said, this is a great strategic opportunity for the state of Israel and its allies in the region to generate a positive change. We can see that happening.
Well, Avi, we are going to come back to you in a little bit, so definitely stay with us. But before we do, we are going to go to the southern border where our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran, is standing by in the border town of Sderot. We now have some confirmation from the Israeli military that they have taken out the Hamas commander that was responsible for the attacks in several kibbutzim along the borders and the massacres there. Give us some updates, Ariel.
Right, Ariel. So as the IDF continues its continuous airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, aimed at taking out key Hamas officials and also commanders, this is the latest in assassinations of key commanders that took part of the bloody rampage last Saturday. Yesterday, it was the commander of the entire raid. Today, it was the commander of the raid on two border communities, Nirim and Nir Am. And this continues as all the while Israel continues with its shelling and airstrikes across the Gaza Strip. Now, while Israel is continuously striking, IDF spokesperson in Arabic just released a plea for an announcement that allows a safe passage through a corridor down south in the Gaza Strip between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. So starting in just under an hour, and will continue for 5 hours. This is the second day in a row that the IDF is allowing this safe passage, this corridor for residents in the northern part of the Gaza Strip to head south. Many listened to this call yesterday. However, the IDF also shared images of Hamas obstructing these attempts to go down south, putting up roadblocks, causing lots of traffic and making it more difficult for its people to head down south. Add to that calls by Hamas leadership not to listen to Israel's warnings, given that Hamas is interested in keeping as many human shields as they can, as they are positioned themselves in tunnels underground, while the population above ground really doesn't have anywhere to go. And so in advance, ahead of this corridor, Israel, in the meantime, not only taking out key commanders, but also targeting a Hamas police station in the Gaza Strip. And so attacks are continuing and will continue, I would imagine, even during this corridor, but not in the area where the residents of Gaza are planning to head down south, and that's in accordance with the latest IDF statement.
And Ariel, I know that you've been there for a while now, and you've described the place as only 30% of its former population due to its evacuation, a bit of a ghost town. But in the light of that, with this imminent invasion, with the aftermath of the horror that residents have seen over the past week, what is the atmosphere like down there?
Well, it's hard to tell what the atmosphere is for average citizens because you don't see them. Really, there are no pedestrians walking out in the street. Everyone that is here is staying close to their protective shelters, because in a town like Sderot, which is so close to the Gaza Strip, you only have 15 seconds to make it to your shelter. And so given that this area, and as well as the rest of the border communities, have been consistently targeted over the past few days, the residents of Sderot that have stayed, we're talking about roughly 30% in a town of between 28 and 30,000 residents. They're hunkering down at home. You don't see a lot of civilian vehicles driving around, and the few that do try to make it out as fast as possible, because this is, Sderot specifically is not a closed military zone, but just a few less than a mile that way, the whole strip surrounding the Gaza Strip is a closed military zone, and that is because this is where the military is preparing its forces for this imminent ground invasion that is expected to take place, at least according to Israeli high-ranking officials, in the very near future.
Well, thank you, Ariel, for that report from the ground, and stay safe out there. We'll come back to the studio for one more element here. That, of course, with you, Owen Alterman, our senior correspondent. We know the United States sending 2 carrier strike groups enough firepower to level a nation and a very obvious threat to Israel's regional enemies. What is the political considerations that the United States is going to be looking at of whether or not to activate these strike groups?
I think political considerations, zero. The considerations are absolutely geopolitical entirely. I really, truly imagine that the Biden administration simply isn't thinking about politics, that this is above politics. They see this as part of the U.S. commitment to its allies, a statement about U.S. commitment to its allies at a time when China and Russia are rising powers, Ariel. And if the U.S.-Israel bond would be broken, I think American allies around the world wouldn't be able to trust the United States. I mean, obviously, Joe Biden feels this personally, as does Antony Blinken. That was very, very clear to all of us last week. But as a hard matter of realpolitik, this has to matter to the United States. And by the way, I think it has to matter to American policymakers and strategists, irregardless of how they feel about the U.S.-Israel relationship itself. Maybe they feel it was a mistake. Maybe they feel the United States has overinvested in Israel. Be that all as it may, the U.S.-Israel alliance is a fact on the ground, going back decades. And if that were to be broken in any way at a moment like this, what would that mean for Ukraine? What would that mean for U.S. allies in East Asia, around the world? It could erode the American position everywhere. I think that's one of the reasons why there was such a sense of urgency here, and the need to ensure that no matter what happens, that Israel wins the war. Whatever the cost, whatever the scenario, to absolutely ensure that Israel wins the war. And I think that Avi Melamed was getting to that point, right? With the idea that these carriers were there to ensure that that would happen. So I think those are the considerations. I think they're fairly decisive. I would imagine that as time goes by, and certainly as the situation in Gaza becomes more complex, I'm sure there will be political pressure within the United States, but there still is wide support for Israel. The massacre and the scenes that we saw last week will never disappear from the public imagination. But at any rate, this is far beyond politics. This is about something much, much more essential.
I'm going to continue that with you, Avi, because the United States has put the gun on the table. It's a clear threat to Iran. It's a clear threat to Hezbollah. Is it enough of a threat?
Well, as I said before, for the first time, I would say, for the last decade, the United States of America basically stands in front of Iran and has said, enough is enough. Up until now, there has been an ongoing, convoluting, appeasing approach toward the Iranian regime. The danger was out there. It was in front of our face. We have totally and constantly alarmed about the Iranian master plan and the danger the Iranian regime presents to the region. What we see right now is the manifestation of this danger in a very severe scenario. As I said before, the United States of America right now building its military power in the region, okay? And that, as I said before, the Iranian regime now have to make a decision. If it's going to intervene, he's going to lose strategic cards because he's going to be severely beaten in Syria. He's probably going to be severely beaten in Lebanon if he's going to do a move sending Hezbollah into the war. You don't appease evil. You eliminate evil. And I would like to add one more thing about the context of the United States of America. United States of America has lost its image as a superpower in the region, basically because it was unable to project power. The most clear signal for a power is the ability or the fact that you don't use the power. You only project power, and that should be enough. President Biden say one word.
Point out right now, because on the topic of projecting power, we're seeing on screen a live image of some airstrikes going down in the Gaza Strip as Israel prepares the way for ground forces in the imminent invasion they have promised. But before that, we are going to go back to analyzing the situation with the United States and its support, Avi.
So I was saying before, Ariel, that in Biden's amazing speech, the very inspiring and powerful speech that he gave, there were many, many great things that he said. There was one word that captured my attention. The word was don't.
It was meant to capture your attention. He said, I have one word.
I have one word.
With a colon.
Don't. There was no belly dancing of rhetoric. There was no convoluting statements. There was not calling for whatever. One word. Don't. This is projection of power, and when it is backed with actions on the ground and with the clear understanding on the other side that the United States of America will not hesitate to use its power to secure its strategic interests, this is projection of power. This is a pivotal moment in the story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is a pivotal moment in the story of the Middle East. It is a pivotal moment in the story of the relationship of the United States of America in the region and beyond the region, as you very accurately mentioned. This is the time where the United States of America can and should rehabilitate its declining image, can and should rehabilitate its power in the region. The United States of America can use this moment as a moment to basically come back big time in the Middle East.
You say it can, you say it should. The question is Biden bluffing?
I don't think that he is bluffing.
He can't be bluffing. He made the speech to the entire world. He said there's one word, don't.
I don't think he's bluffing. Look, he's sending military power. Right now, as I said before, I have to reiterate it. There is enough aerial power in the neighborhood to eliminate Iran's assets in Syria and basically take out the whole Iranian master plan and basically totally neutralize it.
What about the Iranian military itself?
The Iranian military, this is something very important to understand about Iran. Iran has a very vicious and sophisticated mindset and code of action. The Iranians are not sacrificing Iranians. The Iranian regime are sacrificing Yemenites, Lebanese, Syrians, Israelis, Palestinians, Iraqis, Afghans, Pakistani Shiites, and so on and so on. The presence of Iran in Syria is mostly based upon those militias that are backed by the Iranians. There is presence of Iranian Revolutionary Guards, but in the end of the day, one of the most staggering things when you look at the Iranian master plan and the way they have been entrenching themselves across the Middle East was that they were able to deploy these armies of terror, basically sacrificing everybody in the region other than the Iranians. So one of the most significant components in the Iranian master plan of taking over the Middle East is a concept that is called the land corridor. We are looking at the Iranian attempt to create land corridor stretching from Iran, crossing through Iraq, because Iraq to a large extent is under major Iranian influence, entering Syria and ending up in Lebanon. The critical component of that land corridor is located in Syria. In the eastern part of Syria, very close to the Syrian-Iraqi border, there is a military compound that the Iranian built. This is a transition point for the Iranian militias moving into Syria. That compound can be taken out by aerial strike in a minute. And all this land corridor could be wiped in a minute because, as I said before, there is a massive aerial force right now gathering in the Middle East that Israel and the United States should deploy, should activate if the Iranians are going to send the Hezbollah into the war. Now, the Iranians have to face the dilemma, and they should understand if they are stepping in, their whole master plan is going to be collapsed.
So what would be the trigger for the United States or Israel to act directly against Iran?
Massive involvement of the Hezbollah in the war.
But Ariel's question is very specific. To act against, if I understood your question correctly, to act against Iran itself. Because if Iran's entire strategy, I think I'm taking your question a step further. If Iran's entire strategy is based on the fact that it won't sacrifice Iranians, maybe the strategy has to be to force them to sacrifice Iranians, at least their military targets and assets.
Well, that one option, I don't think that's the right option to move in. The Iranians don't really care if they're going to sacrifice, and then it will play to the end of the... There are enough assets of the Iranians outside of Iran and outside of the direct control of the Iranians. There are enough assets of the Iranians that are very significant for the Iranians, and those assets could be taken out. The United States of America will not attack Iranian-backed assets in Iraq, for example. That would be not a wise thing to do. But Syria, that could be right thing to do. There is one more component about Syria that we have to take into consideration. There was a news or a piece of news. The United States deployed another jets in Jordan. Why is it so significant? Because Jordan is also facing the threat of the Iranian militias in the south part of Syria. This could be a golden opportunity for the United States of America, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, the states that are threatened by the Iranians. This could be a golden opportunity to take down, to dismantle the Iranian strategic structure that was built in Syria. And when you do that, you are basically crippling totally the Iranian master plan. What should be the condition for that? The message is there. If Hezbollah is going to join the war, Syria is on the table. The Iranian assets are on the tables. And by the way, notice that there has been some sporadic, I would even say symbolic attacks from Syria to Israel. Didn't cause anything serious, nothing so dramatic. Did you notice what was the Israeli response? Attacking the airports of Damascus and Aleppo. The message is very simple. You will open another front, you are going to lose your major assets in Syria, take it into consideration. And that has to be backed by actions on the ground if circumstances call for that.
We have less than a minute left, so I guess if we can answer this very briefly. There's a threat on the table. You said Iran's built this ring of fire. They had, in the first 48 hours before direct U.S. involvement, the opportunity to activate Hezbollah. Why didn't they?
They lost the edge of surprise. Basically, the situation in Lebanon is very, very sensitive. Lebanon is a collapsing state. One of the possible outcomes of a massive war between Israel and Hezbollah would be the total disintegration of Lebanon, which will involve maybe a civil war. At that scenario, Hezbollah will have to divert attention to what's going on in Lebanon. And there is another significant issue. One, of course, is the American immediate ultimatum or sort of like strong American signal from the early days of the war to the Iranians and the Hezbollah that deter them. And then there is another thing, the pictures that are coming out from Gaza Strip. Hezbollah looks at the picture, it adds to their dilemma.
Thank you very much, Avi, for helping us understand the whys and the hows. For everyone else, we're out of time. Stay safe out there and stay strong.